Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Tim shares his path graduating with a master's in engineering and quickly losing his job as the scandal at Enron unfolded. We learn how he got back on his feet, how he leveraged the MBA to get a job in investment banking on the West Coast during the great financial crisis in 2009, and eventually how he had a 10-year run from associate all the way up to director at Barclays. This is a long one, but Tim was a really insightful guest, so I wanted to unpack what each stage was like for him. Hope you enjoy. All right, Tim, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. No problem. So the quick 2-minute, graduated from the University of Virginia with a degree in systems engineering, went into the energy industry for a little while after that, but, ultimately decided that I wanted to get into something that was a little bit more finance related, a little bit more, in depth in terms of, in terms of the work that I was doing and the numbers around that, and, really getting to work with C-suite level executives. So ultimately, after a couple, 4 or 5 years in the energy industry, went back to business school at the University of Michigan with the intent of getting into investment banking. So graduated in 2009. Tough year to come out, but
would you say 08 or 09 was worse for people?
I would say 09 was probably worse because, it didn't really hit until the end of 08 because I was doing my summer internship in 2008, and sort of towards the tail end of that, that's when people started to get really nervous of, am I actually going to get the offer to come back here the following year? So it was, okay. It was rough, but flip side, it kind of worked out well because you came in a lean class, which always helps in terms of, in terms of when you're thinking about your career progression and forward momentum. But so did my summer internship in 2008 at UBS in the Los Angeles office, and then came out of business school in 2009, started full time at UBS, but given what we were just talking about with the circumstances around 2009, kind of ultimately made the decision to look around a little bit and see if there was something else that was a little bit more firm footing in the Los Angeles market, and moved over to Barclays in the financial sponsors and West Coast corporate coverage role in May of 2010, and then stayed there until April of 2016, at which point I moved to the London office, also within the financial sponsors team, and stayed there until very recently.
Very cool. Thanks for that. That helps frame everything. So let's go all the way back to, well, first off, I see Virginia, I see Duke, Michigan, I see West Coast, London. You're kind of like a very global character. So to give the audience a little bit, like, where are you from? Tell me a little bit about, like, why kind of East Coast, Midwest, anything in particular? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. My parents are both from the East Coast. My dad's from the New Jersey, New York area. My mom's from the South, from North Carolina. We moved around a bunch as a kid, and kind of ultimately settled around junior high school years outside of Chicago, but ultimately decided that living in negative 20 degree weather every winter wasn't the ideal situation for me. So I liked the East Coast. I liked the Southeast. And after looking at a bunch of different schools, ultimately decided that University of Virginia was just the right fit for me more than anything. It's, I don't know that
beautiful
anybody,
campus.
It is. It's great. And I don't know that, I'm sure that people can say, this is why I chose this and this is why I chose this. Look, there's a lot of different schools I could have chosen. I'm sure that I would have been very, very happy at all of them. that's just
I
ultimately
asked because
good.
we actually have high school students now, like paying more often and being in the community, like
Okay.
trying to figure out like, okay,
Yeah.
what school should I go to? And
Yeah. Yeah.
UVA does well for finance placement, even though you didn't use it for that.
No, no. And I can only imagine the pressure of high school students these days. I mean, it was substantially easier for me when I was in high school. I just had to worry about going to class and playing sports, and that was it. Now these kids need to figure out, 17 different things to put on a resume before I even knew what a resume was. So
So, okay. So you come out, systems engineering, quick recap. What is that? And then why, you got the master's in engineering management right after at Duke?
yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Tell me a little bit about like oil and gas. Tell me what specifically you were doing there and what is that career like? Is there any, is it complete? It sounds like it's completely unrelated to finance, it's all engineering based, but a little bit.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, so I guess to answer your question around systems engineering, what was it? It's a lot of decision theory and optimization and stuff like that. So I don't want to insult anybody here, but I don't know that it's necessarily like your hardcore engineering, like an electrical or mechanical or
Right.
chemical or something. But there is a lot of computer-based stuff in that. It's probably even more so in today's world. But programming didn't sort of mesh with me very much, and a lot of the jobs that folks were interviewing for out of the systems engineering program at that time, at least, were in IT and IT consulting, and it just didn't feel like the direction that I wanted to go. So ultimately, I decided to do the 1-year Master of Engineering Management program at Duke, which I felt would continue my engineering background, but also get me more into business courses, which I did not take a tremendous amount of while I was at UVA. So taking the accounting and taking some of the initial finance courses and sort of dipping my toes in those classes.
Tell me a little bit about like what your mindset was back then. Like, were you very much career oriented, or were you very much like, I just enjoy engineering and I'll fall into a job? Like, I know, at least for myself, like, it's very much, if you come from a family that isn't struggling financially, sometimes I feel like it can put it almost, you can be a little bit lost and waffling and there's not like that drive to like, oh, I need to get a job right away. I mean, I still felt that drive because I didn't want to be relying on my parents when I graduated. But tell me how you felt. Were you the same way? Were you like, I need to get that job? Or were you like, I'm just going to explore?
It's a fair question. I mean, I think there was definitely pressure, and this was probably more just at the university level, that there was just pressure to have a job and have the internship your junior year and have the job coming out of your senior year, and being able to say to your friends and your classmates and whatnot that this is what I'm doing, and feeling like you were successful in that regard. But I think you made a very good point in terms of the fact that it wasn't, if I don't do this, I don't know what I'm going to do or how the world is going to work out. And then on top of that, I mean, sort of the same thing. You said you have high school students sitting here. I mean, I didn't know at 18 what I wanted to do. I didn't know at 22 what I wanted to do. I don't even know that at 30 I knew what I wanted to do. Right.
Like, was anyone guiding you like for that decision? Like, oh, I'm going to get my master's. Like, that decision is a pretty big decision. I mean, it's expensive. It's, another year in school. Was it like just looking at what kids were doing coming out of that program?
It was no, I think it was my own personal decision. Say it was expensive. I mean, it's not on the level of like an MBA or anything like that. So it wasn't as though I'm sitting here thinking about, a huge, burdensome amount of debt or anything like that. But I think it really just came down to, I didn't feel like there was a job out there that I was passionate about and that I wanted to do something else and something a little bit different. So going to a different school, getting the master's in order to kind of continue to feel around and see if there was something out there that was of more interest, or at least, kind of a little bit of fire and gave me some passion to get excited about.
So did that first job do that? And what was it? And if not, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I imagine most students listening to this have probably done case studies on this business, but my first job was with Enron. So at the time, it was a tremendous opportunity to get. I mean, talking about we're sitting here talking about investment banking. I was working kids coming out of MBA who were turning down investment banking jobs to work at Enron. That's how popular that role was and that job was. So
what was the title exactly for Enron? What were you doing there?
Oh, that's a good question. It was a, let's call it an analyst rotational program. Okay. So it was a 2-year rotational program of which you do, I want to say 6 month rotations in 4 different groups.
Almost like an FLDP kind of deal.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of a finance bent to it.
There was an aspect to it. I only made it through 1 rotation because I was only there for about 5 months before the meltdown. But there were definitely,
your timing was great.
Exactly. That and coming out of business school in 2009, I'm really hitting it. So there were definitely there were trading rotations. Absolutely. There were, finance department rotations for sure. My first rotation happened to be in the energy services group.
Okay.
And if you ask me today to explain to you what I did, I don't know that I can actually remember.
So as everything was melting down, how surreal was it? What was it like?
It was pretty strange. I, along with a large majority of my group, were taken into a room and we had to start making collection calls to clients because they needed to start collecting cash. So, again, thinking what was I 23 at the time, first job out of school. I mean, no idea what I'm doing here other than I'm getting thrown in a room and trying to call customers and beg for the $15,000 or $20,000 that they owe us so that we can continue to exist for another week or two.
And so how long did that go on? And then what was it like when the writing was on the wall? Like when
I think that was at least for me. I mean, I'm sure there were others that were in higher positions.
I remember hearing about it. I mean, it was a massive scandal. Like it was just basically a huge accounting scandal, right? Where
they were, it was an accounting scandal. It was
shell companies, right?
Plus on top of that, they controlled the trading market, right? They effectively were the market maker. So they just kept changing the curves as it fit what they needed, right? And nobody could say anything because they were the market maker, right? So as the curve moved against them, they just shifted the curve and said, well, here's what it is now, and continued to basically remark to market their positions in order to make sure that it was, working out in their favor until ultimately
that never ends well.
The cards crumbled. Exactly. So.
Wow. I can't even remember who the whistleblower was. There a specific whistleblower internally, or was it like isn't there a movie about this whole?
There is smartest guy in the room. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's supposed to be really good. I want to go watch that now. Now you told me you were.
It took me a long time. My buddy actually finally convinced me to watch it. It's pretty interesting. Just when you hear about all the different characters and whatnot. I can't remember all the names. I remember Jeff Skilling and Ken Lay, and that's sort of the two main guys.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you even recover from that? Did you have any sort of heads up? Like, did you see the writing on the wall and had like a month to kind of start looking, or what was the deal?
No. I mean,
just like one day,
again, it started to feel a little bit weird, right? When I'm getting called into a room and making collection calls. That's sort of a strange thing. But again, I don't know that I necessarily had enough wherewithal at that time to exactly. So no, I mean, it was one morning or whatever, midday, and effectively they just kind of called each division head or team head or whatever you want to call it, sort of grouped up their team and whatever message they wanted to tell their specific team. But effectively it was, hey, don't show up to work tomorrow. And like, okay.
What was going through your head? What was going through your head when they told you that? I got to pay rent.
No, I mean, I wasn't, again, fortunately I wasn't in in a position where I needed to worry financially at that point in time. And I mean, Houston's also a pretty cheap city to live in for those people that have experience there. It's kind of a nice, nice place to wind up, especially if you're in finance. But no, it was more just, okay, what am I supposed to do now? Right. It wasn't necessarily a panic or a fear. It was just sort of a little bit of confusion of this was my job and I was showing up to my job. And now you're telling me that it's gone.
And so there's no kind of no warning, nothing. So it's actually pretty interesting because there's a lot of parallels to what's going on today. I'm sure a lot of people are going into their job or virtually even just being told, sorry, it's over.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me like how you approached mentally and how you approached just like tactically trying to figure out what your next job would be.
Yeah, I think it was December 3rd, 2001. If somebody wants to pop up a calendar on what day that was, but I don't recall. But let's say I took the rest of the week and the weekend off to sort of get my head straight, and then just like anybody, you sit down at the computer, you start. I mean, there's substantially more resources now than there were, 20 years ago, fortunately. But you start sending out emails to your network, start reaching out to folks, start hammering the websites and seeing what's available. And for better or worse, when you're 6 months out of school, 12 months out of school, whatever it is, you're cheap and, still pretty flexible and pretty fungible. Right. So you can
move wherever. So did you stay in Houston? Did you?
I did stay. Yeah, I did find something in Houston. So I ended up staying there I took one job rather quickly, then actually sort of gave me flashbacks. There were rumors that they were going to get bought out. And so being uncertain what was going to happen there, I started looking around again. So I moved pretty quickly from,
you had to jump out of two places within the first year of graduating.
Yeah. 13, 14 months. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So where did you end up for like a good couple of years before the whole business school?
Yeah. So I ended up at a company called Entergy, which is, basically a southern utility. So they own Louisiana Power and Gas, New Orleans, the eastern part of Texas, Mississippi.
My mom and dad are down in New Orleans now, and it's funny. He just sent me a bill from Entergy. So
yeah, exactly. So the Texas marketplace at that point in time was opening up to competition. So effectively, they had deregulated the energy industry in Texas in those in the early 2000s, and so Entergy created a division to compete within the deregulated Texas marketplace, which is some of the stuff that Enron was getting into too, and some of the stuff that I was just sort of starting to get into at Enron as well. So it made sense.
What were you doing day to day coming in?
Basically working with commercial and industrial clients on helping them to set up contracts around their energy usage, which probably doesn't sound super sexy, but if you think about it, there's a lot of these companies that spend millions and millions of dollars every year on energy. So it's a huge component of their
cost base.
Well, call it fixed or variable costs, depending upon the type of business that it is. And so when you think about the market deregulating, you can sit here and go to these guys, and I mean, you can save them up to 20, 25, 30%. And on top of that, there were ways at the time, and I mean, even more so now with a lot of these smart meters and everything like that, to basically structure the product that says, do you need to be running your heavy machinery at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because everybody's coming home, everybody's turning on their TV, everybody's turning on their internet, everybody's doing this, and guess what? That's where you're paying prime rates for your electricity, right? So can you run it at 3 a.m? And all of a sudden you're sort of changing the dynamic of what this company's cost structure looks like. So that's kind of where we alluded to there was some financial aspects to it, but it was obviously
was that like
very,
you were doing that like analysis in Excel and then doing some legal work in the actual contract to structure it, so that type of stuff. Where you you were
working with them through the contract, doing a little bit of Excel analysis. Our company had actually created an online system which you could plug the various values in, and then sort of generate various reports and savings reports and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of it became automated at that point in time, but there was definitely some Excel work and combined with other stuff. So
cool, man. And so you're there for a couple of years and you're just thinking, man, this oil and gas thing or this energy thing, I don't know, long term, or what was the thought process of going to get an MBA? Or it was just such a hot market for banking in 06. You're like, I'm going to go to banking.
Exactly. I think it's probably a combination of a couple things. So I had a buddy who was in banking in Houston, and had talked to him a lot about it, and a lot of the stuff that he was doing sounded very, very interesting to me in terms of, I just, again, being an engineer, I had a very mathematical, very, very numbers focused brain. And so I liked that kind of stuff and the type of work that he said that he was doing. And then two, actually, going on a nice trend here, the Entergy actually ended up deciding to get rid of the deregulated division. So it was sort of the question of, did I want to go back to working for the regulated utility parent, or did I want to
less sexy, less exciting?
And it's kind of the question of, was I going to have to move somewhere else? And I didn't necessarily have ties to Houston per se, but I don't know that I was really itching to kind of continue to move further into the Gulf Coast.
Got it. Okay. So you apply to a bunch of programs, or you're like, hey, I'm going to go to Michigan. What was the thought process?
Applied to a bunch of programs. And I think if hopefully the advice that most people will give you when you kind of think about, business school and spending that kind of time and spending that kind of money, both giving up a career, if you're going full time as opposed to going part time, giving up a salary and giving up a career, and then also putting money out. You want to try and get into the best program that you can. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, with that said, you need to have some geographical considerations, right? As well. Virginia's got a great business school. But you're going to be probably a little bit more East Coast bound. Whereas if you go to, something like a UCLA Anderson, which obviously I worked with a lot of guys in LA from UCLA Anderson, also a great program, but you're probably going to be a little bit more West Coast bound. So just some considerations kind of in terms of where you're thinking about. So yeah, look, I applied to, some, what I thought were top tier schools. Kind of falling within the top 10 or 15 at that point in time that I was applying. And, going back to, sort of the thoughts around Virginia, it was, where was the fit? Where did I think that the program and the curriculum made the most sense? And then geographically, did I think that it was going to give me a situation where I was diverse enough to be able to say, all right, if I want to go East Coast, I can go East Coast. If I want to go West Coast, I can go West Coast. And I think Michigan fit the bill for me.
Awesome. So you were there, you did really well there. You kind of were VP of the investment banking club. So you kind of knew banking from the get-go was kind of your main target. Is that accurate?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Tell me how you prepped kind of going in, if at all. And did you, right away, like just tell people what it was like all the cocktail hours and all that stuff, like in terms of what you could expect?
You're talking about when I was,
when you started your MBA, like that first
when
semester,
I started,
were you like immediately into the recruiting scene there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's, again, I don't, it's 10 years ago. So I don't know what the world is completely like I do know what the world is like, because I was on the other side for a while, and it's definitely shifted back a little bit in terms of the timing, and just the number of events has come down a little bit, just because of the budgetary constraints. But yeah, it was probably, second week of school, right? Bam, you're going to this event, you're going to that event. It's 4 or 5. It was another course that you had to take was going to all these events and going to all these
having drinks and trying not to get too drunk in front of anybody.
Exactly. And figuring out which circle do I want to be a part of, and am I asking the right question, and
how did you get comfortable with that stuff? Were you comfortable in that? Were you naturally like good at networking and just like engaging on these cocktail hours? I'm
horrible at networking, and no, not at all a natural at that. What did I do?
Like, how did you get yourself comfortable? You just force yourself to go talk to people, or you just stood around in a circle and listened to everyone else talk?
Well, no, I think that if you want to get yourself recognized, and ultimately at the end of the day, really what you want to do in those sessions is be known, but not be too well known, unless you're a master networker, right? And you're just incredibly personable. I mean, what you want is for people to go back and say, yep, met Tim. He's a nice guy. Asked a smart question. Next, right? Because all that does is get you invited to the next event or the next round, or ultimately get you invited to the interview. I think that's your opportunity to shine, right? Like
it's great advice.
That's all that you want to do, because you don't want to be the guy who's like, Tim, yep, that guy asked some pretty stupid questions, or that guy didn't stop talking, or that guy interrupted 3 people, who were trying to ask questions. Once you get a negative mark against you, it's just, it just makes the world a very difficult place in terms of kind of trying to get to the next steps of the recruiting process.
Yeah, so info sessions and cocktail hours have that in common, where you can only lose the job.
Exactly. So how did I get comfortable? I usually tried to pick out the people that had oil and gas backgrounds, because I could seem rather intelligent speaking to them. And, the reality was, at least in my circumstances, there weren't too many people that had that background. So I was able to stand out in that regard. And then you just kind of get a list of about 5 questions and make them general enough that you can really ask them to anybody. Obviously, take into consideration the level, right? You don't want to be asking an analyst the same question that you're asking an MD or vice versa. Right. But get a list of sort of 5 to 10 questions, because ultimately somebody else is going to ask your question, right? And then if that's the only question you had, you're kind of SOL at that point in time. And just go in there and try and interject it at the appropriate time. Get the question in there. Let a couple other people ask questions. The circle sort of naturally evolves with people coming and people going. So as you sort of see changes, stick out your hand, say thank you. Can I get your card? And walk away and go to the next person. And I mean, at some point it just kind of becomes, I don't know if natural is the right word. It's not natural to sit around in a circle and ask people questions with all these folks around you. But at some point it just kind of becomes a little bit more comfortable, if you will.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. I think there's still people who really struggle with that, because it's nerve wracking. It's kind of weird. It's like, am I in an interview right now? And like,
yeah, for sure.
Me. So yeah,
for sure. And the answer to that is yes, you are, not to make people nervous about the situation, because I mean, especially people that find that tough, then sort of take that and make themselves more nervous. But, the reality is, just like anything, just practice, right? Practice asking the questions. Ask a friend to sit down with you. And it sounds stupid, right? But just ask a friend to sit down with you and say it out loud, because you can sit there and say, okay, these are the 5 questions I'm going to ask in my head. But then when you try and say it, it comes out weird, or you forget how you're going to say it. And if you've said it to your friend 27 times, it's going to come out normal the 28th time. Right.
Yeah, totally.
And so it's just a lot about repetition.
Getting over the embarrassment of repeating it to a lot of people, to your friends.
Exactly.
I think is a great advice. That's how that's why I always push people before like an important interview. I'm like, do at least one mock interview, please.
For sure.
You think you're good. You think you got all the answers in your head, but it's very different when you start hearing yourself speak. And you're like, wait, I don't really like that. And then your mind starts going like this, rather than you being super confident in what's coming out of your mouth, which allows you to kind of demonstrate your body language just is more comfortable, and you're comfortable in your skin. Anyways, so I want to keep it going, because we're keeping you a long time. But so you end up at UBS for the summer in between your first and second year, correct?
Yes. Yep.
And this is in the financial sponsor. No, sorry. This is in what group?
It was a generalist
group. Okay. So, and then this is obviously like when the world started melting near the end of August 2008, right? There was kind of some cracks initially going through. So tell me about what was it like that summer? working crazy hours, but then more specifically, and this was LA. The
Yes.
offer? Okay.
Yep.
And then more specifically, tell me a little bit about, if you remember, like, was the return offer rate just horrible because of everything crumbling, or was it kind of promised then withdrawn? I would love to just hear about the return offer rates, kind of what was being communicated during while, as the global financial crisis started. Kind of, you were kind of at the top and started to press down.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously I can give you the numbers from LA, which is going to be a little bit skewed because it's a small population, right? So the percentages are going to be off, but I think it was 5 of us and then 3 of us got the offer to come back. So,
okay. So like 60%.
60% hit rate. Mm-hmm. In terms of the entire population, I don't know if 60% is exactly right, but it was probably around that figure. I know that we had a very
50 and 70.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we had a very, very big summer class in the 3 digits, 115 plus or something like that, just in the US.
Yeah.
And it was certainly in the double digits when the final offers went out and when the acceptances came out. But I mean, in terms of the offer, it was pretty standard. Giving you the offer to come back. Obviously not everybody's getting this. We'd like you to give us an answer as soon as possible. And as soon as you feel comfortable making the decision. And that was it. It was straightforward. It wasn't rescinded. It wasn't given and then taken back a couple weeks later.
Did you feel lucky at that point because of what you saw happening? Or did you feel like, oh, this is, maybe I could leverage this to another offer? What was the thought process there? Because I know a lot of people think, I can leverage this.
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I think that there's a couple of points to consider around that. To answer your exact question, no, I never thought about leveraging it. That was the place that I wanted to be, and that's where I wanted to get the offer. If I wanted something else, I would have taken a different decision for the summer, right?
So how did you make that decision? You had multiple offers for different banks at certain summers, for the summer.
Yes, but I have to think back now. I think that the only one that I had in Los Angeles was UBS. I think that was actually the only bank.
Why LA was such a draw to you? Weather? You were done with the Michigan.
I was. Yeah, I remember one day that I forgot something at home and I had to walk back from class and then walk back to class to get it. It was brutally cold, and I had this monster jacket with like this huge fur hood that everybody made fun of me for. But I had been living in Texas, right? So, I was like, man, I can't handle this anymore. Can't handle it. It gave me, the Chicago flashbacks, and I'd always wanted to get to the West Coast. And I felt like it was a good opportunity, and I figured, look, worst case scenario, I don't like it. Things don't work out. There's a ton of banking jobs in New York, and I can probably figure out a way to get back there if I need to.
Yep.
Whereas if you're trying to go the reverse way, that's a pretty tough path. So
why do you say that? I'm curious, because sometimes people would say, oh, New York, it's easier to get at it because New York is like the flag tends to be the headquarters, the flagship. And sometimes easier to get regional versus going regional flagship. You're just saying you just felt like it's just so many more opportunities in New York.
It's just it's just a number. I mean, yes, it's a fair point. You have less people going for the regional offices, but you also have less positions. You have more people going for New York offices. You have more positions. But I think the reality, I mean, again, going back to the percentage figures, if you have a class of 3 and you add 1 person to that class, that's a huge percentage increase, right? If you've got a class of 25 and you add 1 person to that class, then you can probably figure a place to slot them in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And especially from like a cost, a cost-based perspective, right? Because I mean, again, I don't know how all the banks work, but if you think about it,
so you get this offer, you're psyched. You're like, it's in LA. This is where I want to be. I would have chosen.
Yep.
So tell me, was the summer really tough? Was it like 100-hour weeks, or 80, a little more chill because it's LA, or what? What was that like?
Well, if you think back to UBS LA at that point in time, it was kind of 1 or 2 years post Moelis leaving and starting up his own shop. And, I mean, I'm sure that there's people can probably read stories on WSO about the UBS LA office Moelis, Moelis days and sort of take from that what they want. Right. No, it was certainly not chill by any means.
So you're saying culturally it was still ingrained there to work very hard, and it was similar
absolutely.
To in New York, and it
absolutely.
was long hours.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. But it was great. Loved the people that I worked with. It was a great, and
this was in finance. This was generalist, but then tell me about the thought process of like, then you were given a full-time offer in a generalist pool or in financial sponsors?
Yeah. So it was in a generalist pool. So it was basically, the office was set up where they had a tech team and they had a generalist pool.
Okay.
So I was in the generalist pool, which keeps you out of the tech team.
Okay.
And so that was the offer that was given. That was the offer that I accepted. But ultimately, from the summer to the full time, they had changed how they wanted to arrange the office. I don't know if this was corporate wide or if this was just in the LA team, but effectively they decided that they wanted to start slotting the analysts and the associates into specific teams rather than having a generalist pool.
Okay.
So
any thoughts of why that might have been? Just maybe consistency of the teams you're working with in New York.
Potentially consistency, or potentially from a just easier cost structure perspective to say like, this is the person who's on our team, and
makes sense. Yeah. Cause they're like, okay, this you're a cost, right? You're an expensive cost. So how do we allocate that cost to you?
Exactly. Did this person work 25% of their time for this team? Who knows? Right. But they didn't share those specific details. It's just kind of my guess.
So they told you financial sponsor, you're going to be financial sponsors Lev Fin, or you were like, hey,
they told me financial sponsors Lev Fin.
Were you excited about that, or what were your thought processes? And then tell me a little bit about, for the listeners that don't know what that is and like what your day-to-day is. Can you give them a quick little primer?
Yeah, absolutely. I was excited about it in terms of, I was happy to be going back. I was happy to have the role, and I liked the folks in that team. All else being equal, I would have preferred it to be a generalist role, because I think that you get more experience across the board. And especially as a junior banker, what you really want is to get as much experience as possible, right? On as many deals as possible, on as many variety of deals as possible, on as many products as possible, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But, with that said, fine. It's a great team. It's a very, very technical product, which is a great place to be as a junior banker, in my opinion, right? A lot of modeling, a lot of analysis, a lot of going through terms and terms and conditions and term sheets and stuff like that. So to answer your question, what is that? So again, at UBS at that time, financial sponsors and leveraged finance was a single team.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what is financial sponsors? That is you covering private equity firms, right? So you think about your, Apollo, TPG, Hellman and Friedman, Blackstone. all the big names that you can toss out there. And you're basically working with those financial sponsors, helping them to purchase companies, right? So
you're providing the financing.
You're providing the financing. You're potentially providing advisory advice if they want that, and if you have a team that if they happen to have a senior banker that knows a tremendous amount about that industry, and they feel like it's beneficial, they may hire you from an advisory role. So, But absolutely, majority of financial sponsor work is going to be providing financing to purchase those companies.
Now, in the modeling you're doing on that financing, is it different from like a specific? Are you building the actual M&A model for
LBO model?
Are you building that actual LBO model for the private equity fund, or
typically not? They'll have their own.
Yeah, but you guys on your side too.
Yeah, you'll build yours, and then they'll feed you their view of what they think the business can do, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You obviously, as a bank, need to have your own view of what you think the business can do. So
they say it's going to go like this because they want to give you, they want to make sure that they can get as much debt as possible on the business.
Yes, but
the dynamics. I'm just trying to learn the dynamics of they're pushing you for cost to lower. They want as cheap a debt as they can get.
as cheap a debt as they can get, as much debt as they can get. Right.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, that's always the case, right? Because that drives their equity returns.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, to be fair, I would say that it is usually going to be more conservative than the management's case. And the financial sponsor will almost certainly, again, this isn't going to be shared with you and they're not going to give you the details around it, but they're almost certainly going to have their own equity case for the business, right? The model that they give you is here's our costs to cover, to cover the cost of debt and to show some growth in the business. But the reality is, if we're buying this business and it performs as we're giving you from a debt case, we're going to be disappointed because it's not going to give us the equity returns that we want. So
you guys are getting some warrants alongside or some equity co-invest.
No. When I say equity case, I mean the sponsor's equity case, right?
So their equity case. So you're saying if it performs like that, then
if it performs like they want it to, if you look at the bank, what we'll call the bank case that they give to all of the banks, if you look at the bank case, the returns that the private equity company would get is probably going to be your standard, whenever you think about answering the question, is going to be your standard 13 to 17.5% IRR, right? Yeah. But the reality is the private equities case is probably about 25%, right?
Yeah,
because they
otherwise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the discrepancy that I'm talking about.
So they're not actually sharing with you these pie in the sky projections. They're kind of giving you a bank case, which is supposed to be like a conservative case to show that you guys are protected on the debt side.
Exactly.
Fair. Okay.
And when you think about it, I mean, that's the investors who the bank is selling to. That's what they're looking for, right? They're not equity investors by the nature of the fact that they're debt investors. So therefore, their concern is, am I going to get my coupon and am I going to get my money back? Right. I don't care if the business performs like this, if the business performs like that, as long as it performs to cover my, cover my investment.
For sure. Okay. So let's jump quickly back to your story. So you get your MBA, everything's great. You have the return offer, you move out to LA, you start. Tell me how things progress. Cause at that point it was September 2009.
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
That was like the depths of the great financial crisis. I feel like it was pretty bad.
I think it was the depths for sure. I think the market bottomed in March. If I remember correctly.
March
09. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the S&P.
Yeah.
So it was, but certainly you're sitting here with your classmates, some folks who had offers to return to Lehman, and clearly those no longer existed. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, definitely a little bit nerve wracking, but there was consistent updates from folks who, were the junior bankers and the Michigan alumni and whatnot, to say, look, everything's fine. We're not rescinding offers. Your offer is going to be there. We ended up, I think our start date ended up getting pushed back a month, if I recall correctly. But no big deal.
So you were only there for 9 months. So tell me what happened as that kind of went on. So you started, and then what kind of rumblings did you hear, and why kind of start looking?
Yeah. So
this is really relevant for right now for kids.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a little bit of speculation that they were going to start sort of bringing folks back to the New York headquarters, and either cutting down on the size of some of the offices or completely eliminating some of the offices.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
how did you hear about that? Just through the rumor mill?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like other associates be like, hey, did you hear or whatever?
Exactly. Okay. Which is probably just some guy making it up, and then it goes around until it gets back to the same person who made it up. But look, it felt somewhat relevant. And so I thought it made sense to just start looking around and seeing what else was out there. Again, going back to the point, I was enjoying LA. I wanted to at least give it a fair shake, before feeling like I was forced back to New York. So, started looking around, started interviewing, had offers from a couple of different spots, but ultimately, again,
How
I
did you
keep
get
saying
a
this.
couple offers in early 2010? How did you pull that off?
Well,
Because you were still employed?
I think it's number. I mean, it always helps to be still employed. And
Yeah.
then again, I mean, you're a junior associate, right? At the end of the day, I mean, it's not.
You didn't even stick around for your first bonus.
I did. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a stub, like a 6 month.
It's a stub. Yeah, exactly. So
okay. So the time you left wasn't that bad because you got your stub and then you could jump ship a couple months later.
Exactly.
Okay. Do you mind sharing what that stub was, given it was 2009, 2010? I assume it was massive. 40K, 50K. Like, what was it? Something like that.
Man, honestly, I don't even remember. You're testing my memory. You're probably right, but I'd have to go back and look at an old statement. I honestly can't remember.
Now that stub would probably be like 150. Right?
Is that right?
Or 100 or something like that.
So I'm guessing in a really that sounds pretty nice. I can tell you it wasn't that.
Yeah,
I honestly do not remember. But your numbers sound probably pretty ballpark.
We could probably pull up like some old salary data in the company database and probably try to see if we could pull it out. But I don't have it offhand. But my guess is there were a lot of donuts given out, or zero bonuses, or really small bonuses.
I mean, again, like as a stub, they're not gonna, they're not gonna
make it rain.
Do anything on those. Well, they're not going to do anything on those folks either, right? You can't can't sit here and say somebody's been here for 3 months. We're going to give you zero, unless that person's done nothing, right?
Right. Okay. Fair enough. So you start looking, you get a couple offers.
Yeah.
One of them being Barclays. What else? Any other? Do you mind sharing the other firms that you got offers from and what those interviews were like?
Yeah. So the other one that I was seriously considering was Moelis.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting decision.
Yeah, it was a very interesting decision. And it was not an easy one, I'll tell you that. Mm-hmm. And what were the interviews like? I would say
let's talk about the decision first off. Like, why, when you did get the offers, so why was it tough? I mean, Moelis was like, it'd been 4 years, 5 years?
4-ish years.
So they were off to the races, right?
They were doing extremely well. Extremely well.
So you're kind of looking at that and thinking, place to be, paid extremely well, worked very, very hard. So it was, sort of the standard banking payoff, which is, it's going to be 6-7 days a week. But at the end of the day, when January, February rolls around, you're going to feel good about, feel good about your decision and feel good about life for a little bit. And then, go back to the grind. Mm-hmm. And, I obviously knew some folks, over there, given the proximity, both physically and relationally, for the two offices. And then Barclays, was probably more of and this goes back to the interview question as well. But Barclays was probably a little bit more of a lifestyle / longer, felt like it would have been a longer term decision at the time, in terms of what I, career progression, I guess, if you will. And that turned out to be true.
That is, I can't say what would have happened on the other side, because I didn't.
You would have burnt out,
make
man.
That decision.
You would have burnt out. Come on. No, you might have been great and still been there. Who knows? Right. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
It's a great firm. Barclays is a great firm. So I could see that would have been a tough decision. So you ended up going Barclays. But yeah,
it was, it was a sponsor's role, and it was also West Coast corporate coverage. So it kind of got me back to the generalist that I wanted to be doing. So I kept doing the financial sponsors, which I had the background with, and I got to go into more of corporate finance. So I liked that aspect of it. And, again, just culturally for me, and like you said, I think that both firms are great, and I don't think that you can make a wrong decision with either of them. But at the time, culturally for me, it felt like the right place to be.
did you talk to a lot of associates to try and figure out, okay, is it 90-hour weeks or is it 60, 70-hour weeks? Did you talk to people to get that frame
Um,
before making that decision?
The reality is at that time, I didn't really care because I knew it was going to be less than I was working. So
At both, at either?
probably would have been about equal at Moelis. So
Yeah.
I guess the answer would have been, it's either going to be the exact same or it's going to be better. So it didn't feel like the need to have too much conversation around that.
Fair. Okay. And then, talk to me a little bit. I'll let you go soon, but talk to me a little bit about kind of your progression through at Barclays in terms of like, what was it like in terms of why do you think you were so successful there in terms of getting promotions, stuff like that? And this can be at any bank, but tell me about what you think set you apart with your teams and stuff like that, where they felt comfortable giving you the promo from, associate to VP, VP to director, and then talk to me a little bit about that transition as well. Yeah. Then we'll call it.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think I'll sort of give a little asterisk on the answer here, because look, today's world is definitely substantially harder when you are talking about the promotions than it was back then. I don't want to say like it was by no means rubber stamping, but again, thinking about the world today and the market conditions and everything like that, I think that there's a lot more scrutiny given around, do we put this person from associate to VP, and do we put this person from VP to director, and certainly do we put this person from director to MD?
And you're saying that because of the current COVID impact right now, or just because in general you think even before COVID it was getting harder?
Yeah, I think in general. I mean, it's just it's becoming a more competitive. It's becoming a more cost competitive environment, right? Okay. So the just look at all of the earnings and look at all of the statements around the releases and whatnot for the banks, right? I mean, up until recently, the volatility just hadn't been there, and the trading was getting absolutely crushed, and that's obviously a huge revenue line item for all of these banks. So there was a lot of difficulty around that. And then it's just as with any industry, people are being asked to do more with less, right? Yeah. And so you need to think about that as you continue to progress folks from these various different levels, and increase the salaries and increase the cost base. So look, for me, and I don't think that any of this is exclusive to me. I'm sure that this applies to most people who have made a decently long career in banking, which is, I had the view of, as an associate, and I took this view as a summer, and I think that I continued to keep the mindset is, I am here to put my head down and work as much as I possibly need to work, right? And that's it, right? And I can't say that that's right or wrong, because everybody has their own, views of what they want their, their work life to be, and what they want their personal life to be, and what they want their work life balance to be. But for me, my view was, I worked extremely hard to get into business school. I worked extremely hard in business school, and I worked extremely hard to get this job. So I want to see it through and make sure that I can be as successful in this role as possible.
So you actually had respect from the analysts then?
I tried to,
that's tough, right?
It is tough.
Especially with no analyst years behind you. You got the people going straight analyst to associate who are like modeling wizards. Tell me about like anything there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was fortunate that number one, during the summer, I raised my hand a lot to do models. That was a big thing. I actually went over to the analysts, like the full-time analysts, and said, "Can I do the models for you?" Mm-hmm. And clearly took probably 7 times as long as the analysts could do them, and were nowhere near as good, but at least they gave it to me and humored me. Mm-hmm. And then I gave it back to them, and they probably just redid it themselves, or probably did it at the same time that I was doing it, really. But I think that was a big point, is that I just wanted to get comfort around the modeling and make sure that I knew my way around everything that was going on. I was also in a unique position in which I had, again, because they slotted us into various verticals. So I only had one analyst in my financial sponsors leverage finance, and she was a first year analyst. So it was
You're both
me
learning.
as a first year associate and her as a first year analyst. And that was sort of the world. Right. And there were too many projects to just say, you do the analyst and I do the associate. So basically we kind of both did a little bit of everything to get all of that done. So I walked from UBS into Barclays feeling very, very confident about my modeling and my technical skills. And again, that goes back to the what I was saying before about the leveraged finance background as well. Is just extremely technical and gives you a good chance to really dig into the numbers and the figures. So I'd like to think that I was able to gain some respect from the analysts, but you have to ask them. They may have a different answer.
I ask that just because oftentimes post MBAs without the banking experience that want to come in and just be managers doesn't go very well. It's
worst decision that you can possibly make in terms of being respected within the role. It may work out for the seniors. You may be able to kind of get the accolades of the directors and the MDs, but you're certainly not going to be liked within the junior community.
So tell me a little bit about kind of just real quick your promotion cycle. So it was about 3 years at Barclays and up to VP. Yeah. How much did your role change? Were you starting to do any sort of? I mean, you're obviously probably getting a little more in front of clients. Any sourcing at all at the VP level? Anything like that?
Not really. And again, my answer is going to be a bit different than other folks that you ask because of the financial sponsors coverage role, right? Mm-hmm. So there was I was working directly with an MD on the West Coast coverage stuff. And so I was doing some sourcing in that regards. I mean, obviously it was mostly, trying to get in touch with folks. And then he takes it over and does all the, all the smooth talking and heavy lifting and stuff like that. But, so it's a little bit different, being financial sponsors coverage, right? Because you've really got the senior directors and the MDs who have the senior level relationships. And so obviously you can kind of get to know the mid-level folks at the sponsors, but a lot of that stuff sort of just evolves over time as you work with the mid-level guys, and then they become senior guys at sponsors, and then you become a senior guy at the bank. And then you have that relationship there. So, but how does the role change? I guess what I would say is if you think that the role changes from associate to VP, then you're probably not doing the associate role correctly. Or you're not going to be a high ranked associate, I guess, if you will. So, you should really be sort of as a second and certainly as a third year associate already doing VP level tasks, in order to make sure that you get that promotion. So it's sort of the weird thing of, okay, I've got the promotion. It's not like my life changed from, Friday to Monday when I got the promotion. It's just, you start to do less of the junior associate, senior analyst stuff, and more of the VP and junior director stuff. And it just sort of evolves over time. Right. So again, as you're in your last year associate year, and then as you're in your first year VP, you're kind of, that's sort of where the transition takes place.
And tell me about your last year as a VP, promotion to director. Tell me that transition.
Yeah.
Because I think that's less, there's less stuff on that, at least on Wall Street Oasis, in terms of,
And again, I think it's probably a little bit more complex in today's world than it was at that time. But, I think the view is, if
you went up fast, right? 3 years, it's fast. To go from
standard
VP to director.
Yeah, three associate or whatever, 3.5 associate, three VP.
I thought it was 3 to 5 is what I was always told. But anyways,
that's director to MD.
Got it.
Or maybe it's changed. Maybe it's changed for VP to director now. But when I was
you're probably
when I was
more
in the
accurate.
role, it was
okay.
It was certainly 3.
Okay.
So I think the general view is, do the senior bankers feel like you can be a senior banker? Right. I think that's kind of the big question is, if you're a senior VP, you're probably proven that you have the technical skills, to do the job. And the reality is, as a senior VP, you're not, again, you obviously you still need to understand the model. You still need to know how it works, but you're not necessarily in the weeds on the day to day, and nobody's really going to drop a model in front of you and say you need to, crank this out in 2 hours, right? You just need to know the fundamentals of how does it work? How are the numbers being driven? And does this all tie together? Right.
Yeah.
Do the margins make sense? Do the growth rates make sense? Everything like that, the cash flows. So if you're in that level, you probably have the technical capacity to do the job. So I think then the question just becomes, does this guy have the wherewithal to be a senior banker, right? Do we feel comfortable putting him or her in front of clients? Do we feel comfortable, believing that this person's going to be able to go out and, use your term, source deals and win business and gain the confidence of clients and all of that. Again, I'm obviously not sitting in the room around those interviews, but that would be my imagination of what they're looking for in terms of going VP to director. Because the reality is, as a director, the goal is just getting that person to MD.
Got it. And so when you kind of took that promotion from VP to director, and along the way, did you already know you were going to go to London? When did that discussion happen? Was it like after the promotion?
That's a good question. The discussion, I think I knew that I was going to get the promotion, but the discussion happened before the promotion.
So you knew you were going, and they said, okay, they'd approved it.
Let me think about the timing. My discussion with my manager was before the promotion. The discussion with everybody else was after the promotion.
Yeah.
So I think, just to your point, get the promotion before you start to start to rock the boat on that. And I think, if there's any key takeaway from that, it's just kind of a question of what do you feel like your relationship is with your line manager? And, if it's good enough and you're comfortable having the conversation, then the last thing you want to do is put them in a lurch and, let them know last minute, oh, hey, here's what I want to do, or put them in a bad situation. But, again, you also need to make sure you're looking out for yourself as well. And
so move to London. Why? Seems like you were on a fast and furious path up to MD.
Yeah. Well, I as all good stories go, I met a girl, and so she, we met in Los Angeles, but she happens to be Austrian. And so my German was effectively non-existent at the time, and is now just really bad. But the conversation was, she wanted to be back closer to her family. And, Los Angeles was great, but I didn't have any personal ties per se, other than my personal enjoyment of the sun and the beach. And so I agreed to give London a shot. So that was effectively the impetus for the move. And
do you feel like that transition was very tough, since it was the LA culture to London culture? What was it like in terms of just culturally different and banking from one side of the pond to the other?
It was very culturally different. Yeah. So it's interesting because, I mean, the exact same firm, right? And the culture across the firm is obviously very, very coherent, but as anyone who's been through the process will tell you, the office in New York is different than the office in LA, is different than the office in Chicago, is different than the office in Houston for any bank that you're talking about. And let alone that, if you're going to go work for the tech team, or you're going to go work for the industrials team, or you're going to go work for the oil and gas team, those guys have their own personality as well, right? So while there's an overarching culture of a bank, there's obviously subcultures within each of the groups, each of the teams, each of the offices. And so certainly that was the case going from London. And on top of that, just country culture as well, right? Being an American sitting in the UK, it's just a different world in terms of.
Were you welcome? Were you seen as an odd duck, kind of being there? And what about what about with clients? Were they like, why is this?
The interesting thing is, it's very international. I mean, just London in general is very international, but the banks and the private equity firms and really all of the areas of finance in London are so international, right? Because that's the financial hub of Europe.
Right.
So it's not as though you're sitting there walking in and going,
odd because
okay, I'm US and everybody's UK, right? I'm US, he's Italian. UK, he's Italian, he's French, he's German, he's Spanish, so
right.
it didn't feel like a fish out of water type situation. And probably I was probably even in a better position because I actually speak English for my main language as opposed to, thinking about all these other people who have to come from another country and do business in a second language.
Yeah, true. So tell me a little bit about you were there for a good run. Tell me about the impetus to kind of leave, next steps, what's kind of in the future for you, and then we'll call it.
Yeah, sure. So I was there for about 4 years. What was the impetus to leave? I think at the end of the day, London just didn't feel like a long-term place for me. Mm-hmm. It was fun. It was a good run. I think if you were 22, it's probably a different vibe than your late 30s. So, having a wife, having a young kid, and we just sort of, I guess, took more of the family decision than the business decision at that point in time. And,
good for you.
Ultimately decided to do something a little different.
And now you're in Austria.
Now we're in Austria. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And so anything on the horizon, you thinking more entrepreneurial? You thinking kind of just get something more corporate? What's the thought process for you?
Yeah. Thinking entrepreneurial, thinking startup, certainly not ruling out corporate, certainly not ruling out a return to finance in any regards. I mean, I wouldn't have been in banking for 10 years if I didn't love finance. Mm-hmm. So I think that all avenues are probably open at this point in time, but we'll sort of see where the chips land, and in a fortunate position that I can take a little bit of time to think about things and
what a run.
Digest different opportunities.
From Enron to director at Barclays.
Exactly. And
pretty good run.
Only took me 20 years. So
very cool, man. Well, listen, anything else you want to share before we call it for the young listeners out there?
No, I mean, I guess to wrap up, look, I think it's, especially for the folks that are sitting here thinking about getting into banking, I think it's still a great place to be. Whether it's a long-term career or just a stepping stone in the start of a long career. I think it's a fantastic place to get started. Right. And you learn a tremendous amount. You're given a ton of opportunity that you would not otherwise get in other roles or other jobs, and you're given that very, very quickly. So I think it's something great to consider. And, but at the end of the day, it's not for everyone. And I think that, as you sort of think back or as you think through, what you want to do with your future, just kind of, assess the pros and cons of what you want to do and figure out if it's something that makes sense.
Great. I think it's very wise advice. We'll leave it there. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Appreciate the time.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.